I have had a small amount of DMT that I have kept around for quite a while now, probably a year now, which I got from a very reliable friend who managed to procure it online. I have been interested in having this experience for a long time, and I felt like I had done enough personal research to know, at least somewhat, what I could expect. I have been a long-time fan and listener of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and have heard Joe, as well as multiple guests, talk about their positive, mind-altering, perspective-shifting experiences with this obscure, mystical, and intriguing drug. I had also seen the Rick Strassman documentary, The Spirit Molecule, several times in recent years, and had been interested in having a visionary experience of my own. I wanted my first experience to be with ayahuasca, perhaps in the native setting in the Amazon, with a shaman, but I grew impatient and decided it was time to just take the plunge and try smoking the DMT I already had sitting in my medicine cabinet for so long. I would say that I have had enough psychedelic experiences in my life, both positive and negative, with many different substances, including multiple trips using psilocybin and LSD, that I can say I'm an experienced psychonaut. However, nothing I've ever felt could have prepared me for this. Because of the implications and stories I had heard, as well as my last experience with LSD, I was afraid of it for a long time. Hence why I had it sitting around for so long, probably spurred by my most recent LSD trip, which to say the least was not a positive experience, but that's for a whole other story. The important thing is during that ill-fated trip, I went to a place where I never, ever wanted to go again. My friend had told me I needed to vaporize it with a torch and an oil pipe way back when I first got it from him, and being that I have never used meth or smoked crack, I had to go out and get one. So on a Tuesday evening after a long day at work, I went to a local gas station where I knew they would sell oil pipes and got myself the pipe and a small disposable torch lighter, which was embarrassing to say the least, and then went home to prepare. At this point, I should mention that I have a prescription for Adderall, which I take intermittently for work, and had taken 30 mg earlier that day, probably about 6 hours before the experience. This may have had an effect on the experience, but I can't be sure. Suffice to say, I did not think about it being an issue. I had heard many stories, and almost all of the good ones were people who said that they had a good friend or friends around to help them through the experience. I wish so badly in retrospect that I had heeded the advice of the countless travelers who had come before me. The problem was I couldn't ask my roommate because he's not into this sort of thing, and every friend who I had broached the subject with seemed uncomfortable with the idea. So being the fearless, adventurous type that I am, I read a few accounts online for a bit about people trying it by themselves. And after a little while, I decided that it'd be okay to try by myself. Big mistake. My friend also told me that the yellow crystalline powder he had wrapped up in a tiny square of tinfoil was about enough for 4 doses. So I went by that estimation and sectioned out about 1/4 of the amount I had and scooped it into the pipe using a small nail file. I made my bed and propped up some pillows. Then I put on a YouTube video of some binaural beats, accompanied by ambient music and visualization graphics, which I thought would be cool and trippy to go along with the DMT. And these binaural beats use differing frequencies played under soft music and are meant to induce deep relaxation and meditation by forcing your brain into oscillating theta waves. I was feeling calm and relaxed, albeit I could have possibly still been a little stressed from the long day at work. I turned down the lights and set a small candle, unlit, that had a glass container where I was planning on putting the pipe as soon as I exhaled. As I had heard, the effects were so fast that often you forget the thing you're holding is a hot piece of glass. Session 1, 10:05 p.m., April 28th, 2015. I sat with my back propped up on the pillows I had arranged along the headboard and put the glass candle in front of me, then sparked the torch. I had never smoked out of an oil pipe before, so it was a bit confusing at first. I fumbled with the torch a bit, but managed to get a few small rips and held them in for just a second each, and immediately tasted the awful metallic, plastic-like vapor as I exhaled and heard what I can only describe as the sound a transformer makes when morphing states and changing. It was loud and shrill and seemed to be coming from inside my skull, not like in my mind, but literally resonating from the base of my neck and reverberating inside the walls of my skull. My vision changed, got darker, and seemed to condense and contort in a perfectly symmetrical way, like space bending in the center, and I remember putting down the pipe and trying to focus on the trippy visualizations on the screen. At this point, I could still tell I was in my room and was aware of everything around me, my whole room being warped, and then the vibrations started. Low at first, then louder, vibrating, resonating, oscillation, as if space-time were sound waves coming out of a subwoofer, but the speaker was me. It was coming out my very center, not my body, but my consciousness. At this point, I was still awake and aware of my surroundings, so I decided before it was all gone and wasted, I should try to take another fuller hit. I had heard from many testimonials the true experience feels like you break through and you go just elsewhere. Still in a warped daze, I hurriedly unfolded the foil and dosed out about a third of what was left in the foil, wrapped it back up and set it aside. Then I sparked the torch and ripped it again, hard as if this time, and then held in the vapor as long as I could. Before I could even exhale, I felt and heard a deafening loud pop and sizzle like one of those old photographic flashbulbs, followed immediately by a mechanical whoosh sound. In an instant, my vision warped into what I can only describe as a tunnel of fractal light and sound as my entire consciousness and physical form imploded and was sucked into a black hole the size of a pin. I could feel my form exploding and being ripped away atom by atom as I was rocketed backwards across the universe, across infinite space as brightly lit as the sun. It was like that feeling you get at the top of a sky-high roller coaster as you teeter off the edge and plunge into the abyss, only it was backwards faster than light, curving and undulating into infinite Escher-like loops of this one singular infinite moment. I immediately felt pure terror and realized I had taken too much, and there was no stopping it now. I was rocketing toward the empty, dark void I somehow knew was fast approaching behind me. I think at this point, I must have started screaming, but my voice was absorbed into the whirring, mechanical banging of the deafening sound all around me, coursing through me. It sounded like in the movie The Matrix, when Neo gets his whole body consumed by the metallic liquid and his scream turns into warbled nothingness. I could see things, images in the blur. As I continued to fall and fall deeper, I remember yelling, "What the F?" But my voice was still cut down by the broken, warbled sound as it stuttered off, disappearing into the void. The images and forms were distorted, escaping description, but still infinitely amazing. But because I was facing backwards, I could only see what had already passed. There were snippets from my life, visions of things I had done, people I've hurt, and regretful decisions I've made, but it was all simultaneous, like a feeling of pure, dark energy, like concentrated darkness. It was a morphing, cloud-like entity that seemed to be aware of me and part of me at the same time. I can only describe it as being made up of all the worst parts of myself, the worst experiences I've ever felt, the darkest emotions. However, this thing was aware and it spoke to me. Not in English, but I could understand its meaning. It showed me over and over again all the mistakes I've ever made, and I was convinced of its intent. It wanted to keep me there, locked in this infinite dark loop of time, forever being ripped apart and reassembled and falling endlessly, all the while being shown my own sins on a never-ending feedback loop of static torment. This darkened, morphing, infinite construct was a prison of my own making. I could hear, or maybe more like feel, 1,000 different, distinct voices all around me, screaming, not saying, but screaming my name over and over again all around me, through me. And I knew that I had put myself into this place for the rest of time. This was my punishment for coming to this place unprepared, for trying to understand what I had no hope of comprehending until the universe had decided it was my time to die. Then the voices all around me shifted from 1,000 into 100, then 20, then just one voice yelling my name. The shrill mechanical banging turned into a knock at the door. I stumbled up and felt a sharp pain in my face and all over my side, my arms. I felt hot blood pouring down from the bridge of my nose. My room was in shambles. I found the light switch and finally opened the door to my roommate, who had been outside the door shouting my name, banging as hard as he could, afraid to come in. I remember telling him I was okay after I opened the door and I just needed a second. He was like, "Did you take some crap?" I nodded as I reached for the bathroom light and steadied myself as I observed the damage in the mirror. My face was messed up. I had hit it on the edge of the bed, or the desk, probably scraped it along the carpet quite a bit because there is a wicked purple and red rug burn across my face. The bridge of my nose looked like it had been smashed against the edge of something sharp. My body was sore all over, countless scrapes across my arms and shins, and a huge bruise on my hip. My head, which I must have banged several times, felt like a mass of throbbing lumps and still vibrated with the mechanical oscillation. I felt as if my body was a hologram and the image was still static, not yet fully manifested. As I staggered out into the kitchen, he followed me, wide-eyed and frantic, asking me what was going on, shouting. I ran to the kitchen sink and started splashing cold water on my face, and I realized my roommate was holding a small kitchen knife, frightened. I asked him in an obviously scared and confused voice why he had a weapon and could he please put it down? And he said that he heard me screaming "what the F" over and over and over. Loud banging and crashing noises coming from my room. He threw the knife into a drawer and offered me some water before I started to try to explain. After a few minutes of frantic explanation of what had just happened, he finally told me why he had been holding the knife. He said he was scared because my screaming was replaced by a deep demonic voice he swore did not belong to me. His exact words were, "It sounded like the devil." I feel as if I know now what lies on the other side. Although the experience still frightens me, I am happy I had it, even though it was singularly the most utterly terrifying thing I've ever felt. I feel now as though I've been given a second chance at this reality, this consciousness, and these series of moments we call life. Now that I know, the next time I go back to that place, I will be prepared. I started off at around 10 p.m. with a weighed-out 35 mg dose in the vape. I was sitting in my living room and the trip went well enough. I had my eyes closed and I got those colorful fractals, but the main thing I felt during that trip was another entity in the room with me. It was trying to tell me something, maybe a warning about something, but I couldn't understand it. I came back and decided I needed to know what that message was. I waited a half hour and threw in roughly 45-50 mg more into the vape. This time I laid in bed with just a dim Himalayan lamp in the corner. I took off again and I went back to that same place as before. The fractals and the feeling of there being another energy entity in the room. I could feel and understand those same entities giving me a message. They were telling me to stop doing something. I still didn't know what the warning was. I remember the sensation of being in handcuffs. It was as if the spirits were giving me a stern warning. After I came down from that, I still felt like I was missing something. I still wanted to know what they were trying to tell me. In retrospect, I wish I had the insight to realize that this wasn't the time and I should sit on what I had experienced. I then made the foolish decision to try one more time and see what I could get out of it. I waited another 45 minutes to 1 hour and packed the vape again. This time I decided I wanted to try and do a much larger dose than I ever have before. I thought that would be enough to give me the right message. I packed the vape's chamber with roughly 120 to 140 milligrams of fluffy white DMT crystals. I laid down in bed again and took off. It was hard to get it all down, but I managed to inhale everything in one hit. Within 15 seconds, the vape only burns for 15 seconds, and I don't remember ever putting the thing down. All of a sudden, everything went dark, and there was this brown matter pushing all around me. I felt a cold wind and a lot of negative energy. I was seeing this brown stuff shooting around the room with pieces of black in it. The best way I can describe it is like a mixture of thick, dark brown mud being shoved around the room. The black pieces looked like pieces of plastic. It was all moving so fast, and I had no idea what was going on. This is when everything went black. The brown stuff went away, and it was silent and black for a brief amount of time. Then I felt like my body was being physically pushed into a fetal position. I started seeing and feeling these matte black rods pushing against every inch of my body. This is when I started to panic. I instantly knew that I was in another dimension. I started crying. I wanted to go home. I wanted to scream out for help, but the only sound I could make was this deep, guttural groaning sound. All I knew is that I wanted to go back to Earth. I started just kicking my arms and legs back and forth. I couldn't see my body, but I could feel it. I could feel those plastic rods and boxes pushing against my body with an incredible amount of pressure. I was kicking and groaning, and I realized that this was hell. I felt as though I had managed to do so much DMT that I was removed from Earth and dumped into another dimension that I would never get out of. I was pulling at my clothes and could feel this silky material around me that I started trying to rip up. I kept pulling and it kept coming down around me. This was when I started to have a modicum of acceptance of the situation. I messed up and now I would need to pay the price. I had essentially given up. I just wanted to rest, to lay down and have my soul die. I couldn't do this for eternity. I longed for comfort. I decided to lay down and stop fighting, but I couldn't. When I laid down, it was as if those plastic shapes were not only pushing against me, but also falling. It was as if the ground wasn't there, and every time I tried to put my head down, the plastic rods gave way to keep falling. All I could do was keep kicking. Kicking back and forth, trying to get out of that fetal position, and dry heaving was all I could manage. All I wanted was to get comfortable, and I just kept falling through this dark space. I started to really panic and was overcome with sadness. I had accepted that this was my new reality, but I wanted to know what had happened to the real world. Was my dog going to be taken care of? What would my parents think? Was my body still in my bedroom, or did I just vanish into this other dimension? Is the world even there anymore? I truly believed that I had pushed myself into a dimension that we are never supposed to see. I then felt this hell I was in morphing. I started to get a vague sense of my room. Although I could sense where I was, everything was still breaking apart, and I thought that this was hell trying to trick me. The room was dark, and those rods were coming out of the walls. I pushed out of the bedroom and walked into the living room. I tried to touch the couch and the wall, but when I did, they broke apart into those plastic rods. My dog was in the corner, scared, but she wasn't my dog anymore. She was a terrifying goblin shape. I decided I had to see what was outside and see how far I could venture into my new and permanent reality. Even though I felt it was all an illusion, I was so hot in my house and wanted to see what else this hell would put in my way. Maybe I felt like I could still escape this dimension. Somehow I grabbed my house keys, out of habit probably, and I walked out into the street. Nothing felt real. Everything I looked at seemed to be breaking apart. I started walking up to parked cars and trying to touch them to see if they were real. The thing is, they didn't look like normal cars. They were some sort of futuristic vehicle, and they all had a menacing look. I was now completely convinced that this hellscape was trying to trick me into thinking I was still alive. I could feel the entity that put me here watching me and laughing at my futile attempts to escape. I walked down my street over to the main road. There were people walking, but when I would walk up to them, most just walked right by me. I then stopped to ask some people for help, and everyone just kept going. I went up to one couple and said hello, and they said hi and kept walking like everything was fine. I ran up to cars trying to get people to help. The cars were racing by me, and they all looked so much scarier with the lights on. I knew that I was dead, and this whole thing, being in the street and outside, was an illusion, but I felt the dire need for someone to help me. I was screaming, "Help me," over and over again. I went up to one guy sitting in his car asking him for help, and he looked at me like I was nuts and shut his window. I don't know that I could even call him a guy. He looked like a goblin, similar to what my dog looked like. I was dripping sweat at this point, and all I wanted was to sit in a car with the air conditioning and try to get comfortable, considering this was going to be my existence for the rest of eternity. I felt that same need for comfort as I did when I was trying to lay down in my house. He, of course, drove away, and I then ran into the middle of the street trying to flag down cars. All the cars were zipping by me. Nobody wanted to stop. I started walking back to my house, but I decided that it wasn't actually there, so I stopped. I tried to lay down, and everything turned into those plastic rods, and I couldn't get comfortable. I eventually decided that I needed the police. I don't know why, but I thought that since this hell was giving me the illusion that I was in the street, and still on Earth, that maybe I could get taken to a hospital and just settle in there. Maybe they would give me some Xanax or opiates to calm me down. Even if this wasn't real life, I felt like maybe I could take advantage of the situation and try and get some drugs. I had resigned myself to the fact that I wasn't coming back to my real life and just wanted to get comfortable. I needed someone to call them for me, but all of a sudden nobody was there. I stood in the street trying to stop someone and people were going around me. I ended up jumping on the hood of the next guy that was moving slow enough. I laid down with my forehead against this guy's windshield. There was a foreign guy in the car who barely spoke English and was confused and terrified. I was yelling for him to call the police, which he was doing. I wanted him to open the door and let me sit down, but I felt that if I got off the car, he would drive away like everyone else. Then I noticed two guys walking in the street who were asking if I was okay. I kept telling them I needed the police, and they said okay and that they were on the way. They then tried to keep asking me what was going on, and I could hear some lady in the background saying, "He's been calling for help for a while. The cops are on the way." This was when I realized that I was back on Earth. I had been put back here for some reason. I jumped off this guy's car and ran away from all the people trying to help me. I sprinted back to my house and went inside. When I got inside, I found my room completely destroyed. All the sheets had been ripped off and the carpet was turned over. My nightstand was completely on its side as well. I realized that those silky materials that I felt were part of the hell were my sheets and blanket. As I returned to reality, I called a good friend who helped calm me down. I had to turn on all my lights and I burned some sage to try and expel those spirits. What I believe to have learned from this situation is that hell is very real and very uncomfortable. It is a never-ending cycle of wanting to escape but never ever being able to. There is no comfort, no laying down, no sleeping, no eating. It is you trying to relax, but you can't. Every time it feels like you can finally just rest and accept the situation, you find yourself feeling worse and worse. I am terrified of going back to this place. This was my message to stop being selfish, stop trying to control things, stop focusing on money. I need to start focusing on helping others and getting closer with God. I do not want to end up in hell, and this experience was just a sample of what it will be like. And I always thought of death as being either heaven or just nothingness. I know now with 100% certainty that there is a hell, and it is as unforgiving of a place as you could imagine. Like and subscribe.